The Senate chamber was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that makes a person's pulse echo in their ears, where every shift in a chair, every shuffle of a paper, feels amplified. The tension in the air was thick, and all eyes were locked on one exchange that was about to become unforgettable. Elizabeth Warren, sharp-tongued and brimming with fire, leaned forward at the microphone. Her voice cut through the room with a tone both commanding and biting. "Senator Kennedy," she said with a half-smile that carried more steel than warmth, "perhaps if you studied the issue with a bit more broken bar depth, you'd understand the consequences of your position. We don't need sound bites here, we need solutions." The words hung in the air like a challenge, one designed to sting. The crowd reacted immediately. Some chuckled softly, others smirked, and a few even leaned in with the expectation of a verbal brawl. Everyone knew Elizabeth Warren had a reputation for sharp debate. But John Kennedy, the Louisiana senator, wasn't one to crumble under pressure. Kennedy sat still for a moment, his hands folded, his eyes steady. It was the kind of stillness that wasn't weakness, it was calculation. For a man so often underestimated because of his southern drawl and homespun analogies, Kennedy knew the art of timing. He understood that sometimes, the weight of silence could be louder than the loudest insult. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice slow, deliberate, and calm. "Well, Senator Warren," he said, "I may not use the $10 words you prefer, but I'll say this, when the kitchen's on fire, folks don't need a lecture on the science of combustion, they need someone to grab a bucket of water." The chamber erupted. Some laughed, some gasped, others clapped before quickly quieting themselves. But what shook the room wasn't just the cleverness of Kennedy's words, it was the truth tucked inside them. His comeback wasn't cruel, wasn't bitter. It was disarmingly simple and human, a reminder that politics isn't always about intellectual sparring, it's about connecting to the people who can't afford to lose themselves in endless arguments. Elizabeth Warren stiffened, caught off guard. For a moment, the confidence in her eyes faltered. She had tried to humiliate Kennedy, to paint him as small-minded, but in one sentence he had turned the tables. He hadn't attacked her personally, he hadn't thrown insults. Instead, he showed that clarity, empathy, and humility could carry more power than any attempt at condescension. As the hearing continued, the dynamic shifted. Kennedy began speaking with more vigor, drawing on the stories of ordinary people he'd met back home in Louisiana, the single mother working 3 jobs, the farmer struggling against rising costs, the elderly couple worried about affording their medicine. Each story carried the weight of authenticity. He wasn't quoting statistics to win an argument, he was speaking the language of the heart. Even those who disagreed with him politically couldn't deny the sincerity in his words. Warren tried to regain ground, pushing back with facts and figures, but the chamber wasn't listening to data anymore. They were listening to Kennedy's steady voice painting vivid pictures of real lives, reminding everyone why they were sitting in that chamber in the first place. By the end of the hearing, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as an attempt to embarrass Kennedy turned into a lesson in humility and respect. Warren, to her credit, sat quietly during his closing remarks. She didn't interrupt, she didn't smirk. Somewhere deep down, she seemed to recognize that the senator from Louisiana had struck a chord that statistics alone could never reach. Outside the chamber, the media buzzed. Headlines wrote themselves. Kennedy's Southern wit silences Warren. Senate showdown leaves viewers stunned. The power of plain-spoken truth. Clips of his comeback circulated online, drawing millions of views within hours. But behind the headlines and viral moments was something deeper, a message that went beyond politics. It wasn't about winning an argument, it wasn't about humiliation, it was about the power of dignity, of standing tall when others tried to cut you down, of responding with wisdom instead of anger. Kennedy had reminded the nation that leadership doesn't come from belittling others but from lifting people up with honesty and heart. And as people watched the exchange replayed again and again, Many saw a reflection of their own lives. How often had they been underestimated? How often had someone tried to belittle them, only for them to rise above with quiet strength? In the end, Kennedy walked out of that chamber not just with a political victory but with something far greater: the respect of those who saw him not as a politician, but as a man who refused to be small in the face of insult. His words carried beyond the walls of Congress, becoming a reminder for anyone who'd ever been talked down to, ignored, or dismissed. See, sometimes the most shocking comeback isn't a louder insult, but the simple truth spoken with courage. The story left people with the lasting thought: greatness isn't measured by how many people you put down, but by how many people you lift up.